What's up, guys? Also Footballtalk here. It's that time of the year. My Divisional draft and roster review series kicks off, but over the next month we'll hop back and forth between the NFC and AFC, from north to east, south and then west, as we put the spotlight on all 32 franchises and how they've approached this offseason with a heavy focus on the NFL draft. This will be more of a podcast version, where I start by reading off all the players each team selected, offer quick scouting reports on them, and discuss how they fit within the roster, what I envision their role to be, then overarching thoughts on each class, and how it fits within the general theme of the roster construction. To wrap up these videos, while I'm not necessarily a big fan of the actual draft grades, I'll stack the four teams up against each other in terms of how much I liked their draft approach in the larger context of the offseason. Just to give you an idea of how much I occupied myself with the topic, I did full evaluations on about 330 prospects this year, plus another 50 to 70 that I just got a quick look at. Still, there's no way around there being a few names that slip through the cracks, especially this year when there seemed to be very little consensus around the NFL. And I won't bullshit you guys when I get to those names, but rather be very brief on those 3 or 4 with a few key notes, since they're fighting an uphill battle to make those rosters anyway. Before we get into the NFC North today, just real quick, if you enjoyed the analysis, please hit the like button for me and feel free to subscribe. I'm here pretty much all off-season, without any silly shenanigans, just real talk about ball, with about one video or article per week once the series is wrapped up. The link to my site, helloswithfootballtalk.com, for all my content, and timestamps for the 4 teams discussed today are down below in the description. Now let's kick things off with the Chicago Bears, who in the first round, 25th overall, selected Dylan Feeneman, the safety from Oregon. Second round, pick 57, Logan Jones, interior O-lineman out of Iowa. 2 third rounders, 69th overall, Sam Roush, the tight end out of Stanford, and 89th overall, Xavier Thomas, the wide receiver from LSU. 4th round, pick 124, Malik Muhammad, cornerback Texas. 5th round, pick 166, Keyshawn Elliott, linebacker Arizona State. And finally, in the 6th round, pick 213, Jordan Vandenberg, the interior defensive lineman out of Georgia Tech. Up top with Feeneman, who I and many other people I respect in the draft space had as a top 15 prospect, showed excellent field vision to track all eligibles, range and ball skills when he collected 6 interceptions as a true freshman All-American at Purdue, but then was asked to patrol the middle of the field a lot at Oregon in those free safety sets, where he'd quickly erase any run-after-catch opportunities and collected some experience covering one-on-one in the slot, where his oily hips can really shine. And although his hand usage could use some refinement when he was put in positions where he actually had to stack and shed blocks in more direct interactions, he did drop down to the box and showed plenty of urgency in run support at Oregon, while lowering his missed tackle rates when he was put closer to the ball, although he may not have quite the quick twitch ability to cover any of the receivers on the inside at an extensive rate who throw those head and shoulder fakes at him. After allowing both starting safeties Kevin Byard and Jaquan Brisker to walk in free agency, they signed former Seahawks corner turned safety Kobe Bryant to a 3-year $40 million contract this offseason, so I actually mocked Toledo's Emmanuel McNeil-Warren to them at pick 25, who would have been more suited as the downhill thumper type, who they'd rotate down for single high coverages. Now with Feeneman, both of those guys' quarterbacks key before the snap are capable of ranging over the top of stuff, but Kobe may be a little safer, staying deeper than the deepest, but Feeneman gives you that insane ability to cover ground and come up with interceptions if the ball hangs up in the air just a little bit. So I think Chicago finds a nice balance here between retaining the turnover potential, but they won't be as reliant on it as they were last season due to all the big plays they allowed on their end. Next is Logan Jones, the former Iowa center, which essentially was the pick that Buffalo returned for wide receiver DJ Moore here, and I talked about Jones as an underrated prospect throughout the process, where he was pushed down due to being a little older, already turning 25 in October, and on the small end of the spectrum, battling the 300-pound mark, who is not going to uproot people on gap plays. And you're going to see those long, strong nose tackles steer him at the end of the reach at times to work the depth of the pocket, but he's an outstanding fit in Ben Johnson's wide zone-centric offense, where he can capture the plays at shoulder of eager defenders consistently. You see Jones' wrestling background show up in how he manages to stay attached deep into the rep and right bodies out of the lane with great core and upper body strength, and also in how he captures re-anchor points. He's super busy with refitting his hands and establishing leverage with the front identification skills of an NFL veteran already. Obviously, this was in response to the unexpected retirement of center Drew Dahlman after signing him to a big contract this past offseason, and they did already trade a 5th round pick to New England for veteran Garrett Bradbury as a stopgap option for another year. Yet I will not be surprised whatsoever if Jones is locked into the starting lineup from snap 1 once we get to September. Next is the Stanford tight end Sam Roush, which was after sliding back 9 spots in exchange for pick 144 coming over from Tennessee, and they involved that in a trade up later, 5 spots up to 124 for sliding back 22 slots in the 5th round, so altogether basically a net sum of 0 with those trades. Roush has tremendous muscle density at 6'5", 265 pounds, along with 10-inch hands, and provides excellent effort to an impact run blocker in line. He's able to sink his hips and get out of his breaks with little wasted movement, particularly rolling through outcuts, and regular nudges off defenders to create openings for the ball. Comes up with plenty of combat catches, and rumbles ahead for extra yardage once the ball is in his hands, dragging defensive backs along with him. My main holdup with him were the sub 31-inch arms, which limit his catch radius, as he struggles with plenty of those passes off his frame, and his range as a blocker, where you see him slip off guys as he tries to stay connected quite a few times, and is very little savvy in terms of disguising routes, frequently tipping off nearby defenders to undercut those. Still, I understand the intrigue with a guy like this, relative athletic score of 9.96, what he brings to Chicago's multi-tight end sets with the rookie sensation Colston Loveland and Cole Kmet, whose contract runs out in a couple of years, when Roush should become the designated Y, but right now, they probably have the nastiest 13 personnel group in the league, battling what the Rams did last season. And the other third rounder, Xavier Thomas, the LSU wide receiver, while wishing each player here all the best for their career, there seemingly always is that one mid-round pick that Chicago GM Ryan Post burns every year, and this was the one for me. Don't get me wrong, 4.28 speed at the combine, where he can really threaten DBs to run by them, but can also make them fly by when he stops off routes, less than a 5% drop rate in college, and can really climb the ladder despite only being 5'10", and he has that angle-burning speed after the catch, doesn't mind finishing strong, while having scored kick or punt return touchdowns in 3 of his 4 collegiate seasons. But for someone with his speed, only 3 of his 64 catches at LSU went for 20 plus air yards. His routes lack more change of pace and refinement overall at this point, and he needs to do a better job of using his body to protect the football. So I see the vision here of this being Ben Johnson's new version of Khalil Raymond that he had in Detroit, and he'll find ways to utilize that speed especially, even when not actually touching the ball, but I can't get on board with this as a top 100 pick, considering the quality of this wide receiver class otherwise. Which brings us to day 3, first up with Malik Muhammad, the Texas corner, who brings a pretty impressive physical profile at 6 foot 180 pounds with 32.5-inch arms and 4.42 speed. Hands on but not grabbing pressman coverage, but at his best with his vision on the quarterback and wide receiver, where he can read drops and attack breaks, and he's a disciplined contained defender with plenty of pop in his hands when meeting blockers. However, he'll need to adjust his style of coverage, where too often he just catches receivers down the field in off alignment and plays too flat-footed overall. He's content with breaking up passes rather than trying to locate and make plays on them himself, and too much of an ankle biter as a tackler, with a career miss rate north of 15%. The Bears basically replaced turnover machine Nashawn Wright off a career year, who got a lot less on the open market than I thought he would, based on how he filled up the stat sheet, with veteran Cam Lewis. I'd expect Tyreek Stevenson to get a chance to redeem himself, following a promising second season, being taken off the rails by a Hail Mary in Washington from Jaden Daniels as a rookie, but Muhammad should compete for the primary backup role on the outside. Next is Keyshawn Elliott, the Arizona State linebacker, someone I know plenty of people in the draft space liked a lot. I never quite got there. Here's my very quick player summary. Elliott is an assignment sound linebacker with the play strength to battle in the trenches and who pursues the ball with a passion, but too often ends up covering grass in zone assignments and dives for ankles as a tackler. The question is how much more you can tap into him as a pass rusher with how incredibly efficient he was on a limited sample size in 2025. So unless you can add to his repertoire in that regard, I view him more as a two-down player. Yet with them releasing linebacker Julian Edmonds this offseason, he may be first up in case Devin Bush gets banged up, battling with Noah Sewell for that spot. And finally, the incredibly talented Georgia Tech tackle Jordan Vandenberg, who earned a perfect 10.0 RES with an insane pro day workout, including a 1.61 10-yard split, and 9.11 broad jump, 4.19 in the short shuttle, and 35 reps on the bench press. You see that explosion show up when he's occasionally splitting double teams and chasing after the ball, and even when caught in awkward positions, his strength in his core and lower half, allowing the corners rush for contact and push the pocket in flashes. As good as the athletic profile is, however, the fact he didn't earn a full-time starting role until this past season, and he's already 24 years old, makes me use a red pen writing his profile. Even as a 60th senior, he has untrained eyes and awareness for play development, being late to react to perimeter runs routinely, and he wildly throws his hands at pass protectors without much of a plan or great execution at this point. So an extremely raw, yet relatively old player already, Chicago waived former third-round pick Zach Pickens and allowed Andrew Billings to walk in free agency, while signing Nylan Gallimore and Kentavious Street to a combined $6.5 million. But you definitely think there's room for a talent like Vandenberg to earn some snaps if he can speed up his development, although I have a tough time seeing that happen as a rookie. So altogether, a bit of a mixed bag for me with what the Bears put together here. I thought Thieneman at 25 was one of the only true steals of the first round, as part of what I discussed when outlining the 2026 safety class as one of the bigger losers in my big draft recap collectively, since the amount of quality prospects available seemingly pushed everyone down a little bit. Logan Jones at the end of the second felt a little reactive and more about filling a spot with a great scheme fit player, but was fine for me personally value-wise. All the mid-round guys were early for me, with Thomas as a massive reach I thought. Even if it's just a designated return specialist, I was Caden Weegan went a round later to Pittsburgh as one of the most decorated guys ever in that role. Vandenberg is a doubtful late I'm fine with, even if there's no way he'd actually be there if there was a whole lot more to him at this point, other than a generational athletic profile. Chicago promoted Press Taylor to offensive coordinator to replace Declan Doyle heading to Baltimore. Will he actually be taking on play calling duties? Let's see if that means they lean even more into multi-tight end sets, since they also traded veteran wide receiver DJ Moore to Buffalo. I was surprised that they didn't address edge at all, but it sounds like they'll lean a lot more into slanting and gaming things up across that front, since they do have solid money invested into it. Let's see if that works out, since Dennis Allen relies as much on the four-down rush as any DC in the league. Team number 2 now, the Detroit Lions, who in the first round, 17th overall, went Blake Miller, offensive tackle Clemson, second round pick 44, Derek Moore, edge Michigan, 4th round pick 118, they go back to Michigan for Jimmy Rolder, the linebacker, 2 5th rounders, pick 157, Keith Abney II, cornerback Arizona State, and pick 168, Kendrick Law, wide receiver Kentucky. Then in the 6th round, pick 205, Skylar Gill-Howard, interior defensive lineman Texas Tech, and in the 7th round, pick 222, Tyree West, edge defender / interior D lineman from Tennessee. Detroit terminated the contract of starting left tackle Taylor Decker this offseason, and they brought on Larry Borum for a year at $5 million, but you feel a lot better about him as a swing tackle, locking Miller in on the right, and going forward with the plan of flipping Penei Sewell over to the left side, which I'm never a fan of, forcing perennial All-Pros to switch spots, but we did see another freak athlete in Thurston Wirfs make the transition appear seamless a couple of years ago for the Bucks, so at least the plan is clear all offseason. As for Blake Miller, a stalwart for 54 straight games for Clemson, almost exclusively on the right side, with an RAS of 9.94, having added 20 pounds of functional mass since coming to the program. His understanding for angles, how assignments change on the fly, his urgency to execute more challenging movement blocks, and beat linebackers to a spot are all outstanding, and he's a technically advanced pass protector who changes up the rhythm and punch timing to go with alert eyes for crossing action. But heavy-handed edge setters are able to stun and press him backwards in the run game, and it also leaves him vulnerable to speed to power and push-pull maneuvers off that. So he'll need to continue to get stronger. I'm not sure how much higher the ceiling is. I had him as my OT7, but still viewed him as worthy of going in the first round, even if there were a couple of guys I would have preferred over him. The Lions released offensive lineman Graham Glasgow, but signed Cade Mason for agency to fortify center, with a couple of promising recent draft picks to either side of him, who now probably won't be bearing as many pre-snap responsibilities and can focus on being their best selves. Then in round 2 they go to Michigan with Derek Moore, who they moved up 6 spots for in exchange for the 4th rounder they had previously acquired from Houston for running back David Montgomery, supposedly to jump the Ravens, since their new head coach Desi Minter had coached at Michigan a couple of years ago still. But even if I liked the player, they might have gotten duped anyway, since Baltimore thought selected the better edge defender in Missouri Zion Young next, and there was another player at the position that went about 10 spots later that I would have preferred personally. So while I don't mind having conviction in your beliefs, I'm not sure if they optimally approached this. As for Moore, he packs some jolt in those hands and plays with good extension in the run game with those 33.5-inch arms, brings the power to condense the edge with the bull rush, especially from those tilted wide alignments, caging in quarterbacks, and his lateral agility to suddenly pull off crossface moves and then the improved two-handed swipes once he's threatened the B-gap to go back outside. That's what really stood out to me. Has more of that high hip build and struggled to play with great leverage, while being more focused on attacking blockers rather than diagnosing the play, and he lacks precision in his initial club to actually knock away the hands of tackles, to where he can actually grease one shoulder for himself and come free on a secondary move. So I didn't love the trade up, but I do believe the player makes sense here, to pair with another former Wolverine in Aiden Hutchinson, As more of a strong side edge defender, Detroit lost Al-Qadim Muhammad in free agency, but brought in DJ Wonnum for a year. I definitely expect more to start, with Wonnum being able to take some snaps off the rookie to keep him fresh, as he's not someone I'd want on the field for too many money downs, more willing to become a better finisher, to be a real asset on those himself though. And they went right back in-state with Big Blue's Jimmy Rolder, the linebacker, who's an easy lateral mover, either tracking the ball or working over the top and slanting in the front, and staying home in cutback lanes and zone concepts, has the strong arms to deconstruct blocks from offensive linemen with drop downs or swipes, and only missed 4.3% of attempted tackles over the past 2 seasons. Plus he rarely commits his hips early as it adjusts route combinations in the zone drops, before chasing after the ball and coming to balance effectively. He's only started 11 games in his collegiate career and needs to become more assignment sound with his run fits, and he lacks big time range on plays way off his landmarks, with very little experience in man coverage, having to carry routes vertically. I thought the value was fine here. We've probably reached the maximum of prospects from your backyard without me getting suspicious of the scouting department. They probably just weren't able to match the $70 million over the next 2 years for Alex Anzalone, which the Bucs were willing to pay up for, but they did bring back Malcolm Rodriguez for another year, and Derek Barnes received a 3-year extension last offseason, so Rolder should at least be given 1 season to learn and earn his stripes on special teams, but might be a starter on early downs by next season based personnel at least. Which brings us to my favorite guy they selected, the Arizona State cornerback Keith Abney, who I called one of the biggest steals of the entire draft. He plays with supreme athletic confidence, with the twitchiness to match lateral movements, but also the speed to run with guys down the field, does a nice job of mid-pointing routes and zone assignments, and finding work off his landmarks late in the down. Plus, he's competitive with setting the tone against receivers trying to block him on the edge, while having shown continuous improvement as a tackler, with a miss rate below 5% last season. He is on the smaller short end of the spectrum for starting outside corner, where bigger bodies may be able to create openings early and late in the route with physicality, and he has room for improvement with how he strikes through the hands of the intended target with his back to the quarterback, in part why he was penalized 13 times since the start of the 2024 season, arriving a tad early. But that's just not the profile of a 5th round pick at that position, considering he's also just a true junior. He was my 41st overall prospect, and I'm still trying to figure out if there was some kind of medical issue I'm not aware of. Detroit resigned veterans Rocky Sin and Vontae Maddox this offseason, but lost Dominique Robertson in free agency, by far the biggest asset if you look at those contract numbers, so I'm not fully ruling out Abney beating out former 1st round pick Taron Arnold, or free agent Roger McCreary for an inside or outside spot, and at least gives you the flexibility to step into either one in case of injury. The other 5th rounder, Kendrick Law, the Kentucky wide receiver, another trade up they made here, sending pick 213 to Buffalo to move up 13 spots here. Twitchy receiver with elite long speed, who can blaze through speed cuts, consistently plucks the ball away from his frame with overhand technique when it arrives at his chest or above, with only 1 of 54 catchable targets dropped last season, and then he runs low to the ground with the mindset of a running back, who will plow for a defensive back waiting for him, but can also burn pursuit angles when he kicks into top gear. Kentucky constantly afforded him free releases, and he may never be a true perimeter receiver, considering how limited his route tree was, and he presents a somewhat limited catch radius with fairly short arms. I'm not sure they had to move up here, but I do believe they'll get good use out of him, with the departure of Khalif Raymond as a return and gadget play specialist. And they closed out with a couple of defensive linemen. First, Skylar Howard from Texas Tech, who has that junkyard dog mentality with a revving motor and low center of gravity for the run game, but rather light, around 285 pounds, and definitely short for NFL standards, with sub 41-inch arms, and he's able to contort his upper body with a smooth club swing combo, paired with the strong ankles to corners rush for contact. It doesn't offer much of a bull rush or overall element to his portfolio, so considering he couldn't earn a starting role in 3 seasons with Northern Illinois, and then suffered a season-ending ankle injury this past October, I thought he might go undrafted. And Tyree West is built more like an interior defender, but the majority of his reps at Tennessee came at 5 technique as an even front defensive end, while only having started 5 games in 4 seasons with the Vols. Put together some pretty impressive testing at his pro day, he could eventually carve out a role as a penetrating 3 technique, but never was more than a rotational player in college, with heavy hands but some stiffness, and no real plan for rushing the passer at this point. So another draft I didn't hate, but I have questions about some of the aspects in how they approached this. It was proven that they needed to address tackle early, and I didn't view Miller as a significant reach. He was just the last among the 7 guys I viewed as 1st round worthy, and they picked him over a couple of guys that I believed had higher potential. More in a vacuum isn't horrendous at pick 44, but I didn't love parting ways with a pick to move up here when I thought there were similar styles of edges available even after that. Roldan and Law I thought were fine value-wise, even though once again it felt like they got antsy for the latter one in a strong wide receiver class. Ebony already outlined as a massive steal I thought, but I won't let that define everything else, since there might be something that I have no insight into with his background. And then I thought they closed things out with a couple of guys they probably could have brought in as undrafted free agents. I'm interested in what this marriage between Drew Petzing as their new OC and Mike Kafka as a pass game coordinator looks like, as they should be working closely together to construct this playbook and marry the run and pass game. I definitely feel better about the O-line this year, and I did like some of the game plan specific stuff that we saw from Calvin Shepard as a defensive play caller, if they can finally stay healthy again on that side of the ball. But I'm not sure if this draft will help push them over the top in a highly competitive division. Which next up are the Green Bay Packers, who also had a bit of a smaller draft class. 2nd round 52nd overall Brandon Cisse, cornerback South Carolina. 3rd round pick 77 Chris McClellan, interior lineman Missouri. 4th round pick 120 the Knight Dennis Sutton, edge defender Penn State. 5th round pick 153 Jagger Burton, interior O-line Kentucky. And then a couple of 6th rounders, 201st Domani Jackson, cornerback Alabama, and a specialist at pick 216 Trace Mack, the kicker out of Florida. Which of course they didn't own a 1st round pick due to the Micah Parsons trade. But let's talk about Cisse, who operates with light, well-coordinated feet, mirroring routes from soft press alignment, and staying square for a good 5 yards if he doesn't feel like he needs to respect the vertical push, has continued to advance his route anticipation and recognition to get a jump on the break, with big-time closing burst and beautifully place the eyes of the receiver to attack through the catch point. Make sure to keep his outside arm free against sweeps and toss plays, and even though missed tackles were more prevalent for him in 2025, it's certainly not to a lack of willingness to get his nose dirty. But not particular discipline with maintaining contain after being run off on the outside by the receiver initially, tends to bite on double moves more than he'd like to see, and gets turned around the wrong way at times, defending back shoulder throws down the sideline. So he has a ways to go, but from the shoulders down, he's one of the most talented corners in his class, and for as wild as the Arizona defenses were, with new defensive coordinator Jonathan Gannon during his time there as head coach, look at what he did actually calling plays in Philly. It was pretty straightforward quarters and variations of it, which should keep things simple for the rookie. Veteran D tackle Javon Hargrave was the only free agent at $5+ million of average annual value this offseason, after shipping of Kenny Clark to Dallas as part of the Micah Parsons trade at the eve of the 2025 season, which will be relevant for our next player here. The only other guy that wasn't simply an in-house retention was veteran corner Benjamin St. Juste, while having let Nate Hobbs go, who unfortunately didn't live up to being a quality option at nickel for them last season, to offer some versatility. So assuming they want to keep Javon Bullard there, I'd expect Cisse to immediately step into that other starting spot outside, along with Keyshawn Nixon, pushing Kerrigan Valentine to CB3 duties, who he might bring on for longer downs if it's not St. Juste. Next up, the Missouri tackle Chris McClellan. This was after a small trade-up with Tampa Bay, 7 spots in return for pick 160, 6'3", 315 pounds, with massive 11-inch hands and 34-inch arms to lock out and control his space in the run game after quickly erasing the neutral zone. Shows pretty good reactive quickness against cutbacks and misdirection plays, along with being so strong that you can wrap up running backs while still being engaged with blockers. While as a pass rusher, he digs under the sternum with interior blockers to ride them backwards, and he frees himself late quite a bit by pulling cloth or throwing the occasional spin move at opponents. But too often leaves himself a step behind when having to match zone flow, and doesn't offer a whole lot of range horizontally, and he needs to be more intent with attacking half the man and utilizing his length to keep his frame clean as a pass rusher, while not showing the snappy hips to actually flatten as he gets to the top of his rush. So a little early for me personally, for more of a 2-gapping nose, will be challenged in different ways by NFL double teams if he doesn't keep his pads down or drops his knee to counter pressure. But clearly they felt like they needed more of a stout presence in the middle of that unit again. I just thought Dominic Orange from Iowa State, who went 5 picks later to Minnesota actually, and we'll get to that in a little bit, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense then. And we'll stay on the D-line with Penn State edge the Knight Dennis Sutton, who brings a borderline elite physical profile at 6'6", 260 pounds, with a 163 10-yard split, nearly a 40-inch vertical, and an 11-foot broad jump. Plays low and with heavy hands at just over 10 inches to set a firm edge in the run game, and has enough juice off the ball and force to work speed to power moves to great effect, but is still developing his play recognition skills and countering the first steps of blocking schemes accordingly, and too often seems to have no plan of how to win in passing situations, where he ends up allowing tackles to get into his frame without the secondary maneuvers to still get loose. Green Bay watched Kingsley Enagbare receive $9 million from the Jets for a year, and they traded Rashawn Gary to Dallas for a 2027 4th rounder, and there were initial reports out there that they might just flat out cut him, so they needed help on the edge, but him and former first rounder Lucas Van Ness aren't really helping you out right now, at least on passing downs for sure. So I guess you have to hope that a couple of second year players in Baron Sorrell and Colin Oliver give you something alongside Marka this season, who's coming off a torn ACL himself. Then in the 5th round, Kentucky center Jagger Burton. This was the selection they received in return for wide receiver Dontavian Wicks, by the way, along with a 7th rounder next year. Burton is a durable player who has started 47 consecutive games and logged nearly 2,700 career snaps on offense, with well over 500 at each of the 3 interior spots. Offers impressive snap-to-snap quickness to get into his run fits, while operating with great leverage, hand placement, and a wide base, and he does a nice job of framing rushers and keeping his plates underneath himself, holding where the refs don't see it when opponents get close. Powerful penetration style shades will be able to shoot through Burton's play-side shoulder and zone concepts occasionally, operates with a bit of a forward-leaning pass pro, and occasionally drops his eyes trying to take control of interior rushers, which makes him susceptible to push-pull maneuvers. The Packers released the versatile veteran O-lineman Elgton Jenkins this offseason, who offered them pretty much 5-position flexibility along the O-line, but rarely has been able to stay healthy for extended periods. I think Burton's experience to do the same if you take away tackle was very intriguing here, and I expect him to see the field quite a bit if anyone were to get hurt. And then the 2 6th rounders, Domani Jackson, the Alabama corner, who once was a 5-star recruit for USC and offers an impressive physical profile, excels at widening the outside release and taking away space to the sideline on go routes, while also having the speed to stick with guys horizontally. Keys on the eyes of the quarterback in zone coverage, staying ready to quickly redirect and lay the wood if the ball goes to someone working towards him, but there are way too many unnecessary false turns spread across his tape, and he's often late to respond to back shoulder throws. Plus, he constantly allowed ball carriers to capture the sideline on him when he bounced wide. The Georgia game last year in particular would make me pull my hair out as a defensive coordinator. So I think he'll need to earn any opportunities on defense by being a reliable gunner and general special teams contributor. And then we get the first specialist, Trey Smack, the Florida kicker, who they must have viewed as clearly the top kicker available, since he actually packaged a pair of 7th rounders for him. As long-time listeners know, I don't evaluate specialists, but he seemed to be the number 1 guy for most people. Only missed 1 of 101 career PATs, 82.8% of field goals, 10 of 13 from 50 plus. It was probably time to move on from Brandon McManus, and I actually believe someone else would have snatched up Smack otherwise. Green Bay extended the general manager Brian Gutekunst and head coach Matt LaFleur for multiple extra years this offseason, showing their commitment to how to build the roster and bring guys along. That's why I think they felt comfortable only selecting 1 offensive player, who should be a designated backup, across the 3 interior spots on the O-line, while giving the new DC Cannon plenty of guys to work with, along with the kicker late. He addressed the 3 biggest positions of needs on that side of the ball, after they replaced Quay Walker as a 1st rounder with Zaire Franklin at linebacker, even if they all could be labeled as more so developmental guys, which we know they like to bet on younger players with upside. Let's see if that comes back to bite them, however, considering they seem to be in contention for the NFC North title every year. They didn't draft a wide receiver after allowing Romeo Doubs to walk in free agency and trading Wicks, as already referenced. However, they got the top 1 rated from me, who didn't actually get a call through 7 rounds, and J. Michael Sturban from Florida, who I also wrote about in an article on the potentially most impactful undrafted free agents last week. You can check that out by clicking the link in my bio. Altogether, not my favorite draft, but in line with how they operate, and there were no glaring strays from consensus boards, while Cisse has a chance to turn into as good a corner as anyone in this class aside from 6th overall pick Mansour Delay probably. Team 4 now, the Minnesota Vikings, who in round 1, 18th overall with Caleb Banks, interior D-lineman Florida, 2nd round 51st overall Jake Golday, linebacker Cincinnati, a trio of 3rd rounders, 82nd overall Dominic Orange, interior D-line Iowa State, 97th overall Caleb Tiernan, offensive tackle Northwestern, and a pick later Jacoby Thomas, the safety from Miami. A pair of 5th rounders, pick 159 Max Bredesen, tight end / fullback from Michigan, and 163rd overall Charles Stemmings, cornerback Stephen F. Austin. Then in round 6, pick 198 DeMont Claiborne, running back Wake Forest, and 7th round, pick 235 Gavin Gerhardt, interior offensive lineman Cincinnati. A much bigger draft class than a year ago, when I think they were tied for the fewest picks made at 5. First up with Florida D tackle Caleb Banks, who I was somewhat surprised to see going around 1 altogether, based on the lack of certainty around his foot requiring multiple surgeries, but not based on talent. carries 325 plus pounds stupidly well, with arms for days, hitting an insane wingspan of 86 inches and basically 11-inch hands. You routinely see him bend interior linemen backwards on down blocks or zone concepts, yet then his high swim to backdoor guys can be devastating as well. For as explosive as Banks is in short areas, there's room to improve his rush tracks and not take himself off course, but he can forklift opponents and use a propensity to leave guards behind in the dust with those cat-like quicks and in and out moves. He needs to refine his footwork and weight distribution to anchor against double teams, and he's an almost comically bad tackler who allows his base to narrow, loses his balance, and leaves his feet on several occasions. He missed 10 of 31 attempts over the past 2 seasons combined. Nonetheless, Banks was clearly one of the top 12 or 15 most talented players in his class. Maybe they'll ask him to lose some weight because he has that game-wrecking potential if he learns how to finish plays. And I'll lump in third-round pick Dominic Orange from Iowa State here as well, because it's very interesting how they approach the position group altogether. Orange is a lot shorter at 6'2", but another athletic big man who can and has lined up anywhere from a 0 to a 5 technique, frequently resets the line of scrimmage, but has improved his block recognition skills in how he mirrors the first steps of the O-line or works against pressure. And you see some instant wins with the club swim combo, with the flexibility to turn pretty tight corners. He'd benefit from learning how to work over the top of down blocks with appropriate footwork, and right now his pass rush arsenal is fairly limited, while getting pretty straight-legged and allowing his power to stall eventually. Minnesota notably moved on from both Jonathan Allen and Javon Hargrave on the interior line after just 1 year each, when they had focused on strengthening that group and the interior offensive line last offseason. So now break up rotational players in Jalen Redmond and Levi Drake Rodriguez likely remaining in those types of roles, where they're not playing 50% of snaps, and hopefully a talent like Tyron Ingram Dawkins as a mid-round pick last year coming along. You're looking at a unit that bets on being fresh and taken into offenses rather than necessarily having invested money into bigger names who didn't live up to the billing previously. I personally expect both rookies to start, where they have the flexibility if the offense uses motion at the snap to shift the front over, since both guys are capable of lining up at a 1/2I or a 3 technique, and then both are also athletic enough to drop off the line on some of those exotic pressure looks we may see from Brian Flores to muddy up underneath passing lanes. In between them, however, they selected Cincinnati linebacker Jake Golday, and they actually moved up basically a full round with the Panthers here to pick 159, to pick 159 for sliding back 2 spots here, so great value. Golday looks like an old school linebacker, but has that new school athleticism and actually played a lot of that overhang position for Cincy. You see plenty of violence in his game when he meets pulling linemen or shoots through gaps when he was actually lined up in the box. Offers versatility in how the defense can call zone coverages with his range to get to extended landmarks, and you see some dip and rips and even ghost moves from Golday at times to beat tackles one-on-one rushing off the edge. Obviously he's still learning to diagnose run plays, try to play on the blocks and deconstruct them, and his agility in space is somewhat limited when forced to suddenly redirect with those longer legs. So it's interesting how his transition to the NFL will look like, but Golday couldn't have really gone to any better defensive scheme, where he will be moved around a lot, can match up with some tight ends, blitz from various angles, including on early downs, rather than having to traditionally read guards, and his wide reach can also be an asset in coverage when they're working with negative numbers on those fire zone calls. Next is Caleb Tiernan, the Northwestern offensive tackle, with 6'8", 325 pounds, a redshirt senior, digs his hands under the armpit and turns the bodies of edge defenders in order to present an open frontside B-gap, has that finishing mindset when he's moving a man against his will to actually embarrass and bury that guy into the ground, patient with his strikes in pass pro, and then combines a firm grip with good ankle flexion to lock up opponents as he digs his cleats into the turf in close combat. Only having 32.25-inch arms creates problems dealing with stunts and enables defenders to stack and shed him more easily, and he gets caught leaning due to not expanding the edges of his frame significantly, where he ends up getting a little heavy outside and lift up his post for the times. I'm guessing the idea here is to have Tiernan as a pro-ready 6th lineman who can probably plug in anywhere but center right away, even though his long-term home might be at right guard if there's some remorse around what they paid for Will Fries last year for agency. And then Jacoby Thomas, the Miami safety, which is the first of 2 third-rounders, including one next year, that they got in return from Philly for veteran edge rusher Jonathan Grenard, a trade they made during the draft, who they had seemingly gotten to a standstill with as it got to extension talks, considering they also want to get a first round from 2 years ago in Dallas Turner out there on the field more, and Andrew Van Ginkel has a cap hit of nearly $20 million this season. Thomas is disciplined with diagnosing run plays and not blindly chasing them going away from him, yet once he gets downhill, he does so with no reservations. This guy's what the defense wants to do, with a lot of late coverage rotations for Miami, and is capable of matching up with some bigger bodies, while his natural instincts in coverage and ball skills led to 5 interceptions in 2025, including a couple of impressive high-point grabs. Has more of that high-hipped build, showing tightness in his lowers and a lack of lateral burst to erase separation out of the break, and generally is flat-footed a lot if you ask him to play off-man. Occasionally you see him drift into nothingness when asked to go to the high post, and he had a career missed tackle rate above 20%, leaving his feet early and not wrapping up steadily. After everyone in the world seemed to mock safety to them at pick 18, he waited another 80 spots, but I don't believe got an immediate start that replaced stalwart Harrison Smith. Thomas to me is more of a Josh McTellis type roamer in the middle of the field, or a big nickel, and the only name of note among that room that otherwise could start is untested Jay Ward, so maybe there's still a spot to grab one of those veterans that is still in the open market during camp. Then as we get to day 3, the first name up is Max Bredesen, the Michigan fullback, who was a walk-on at Ann Arbor in 2021, a year after his brother Ben Bredesen was a 4th-round pick for Baltimore guard. Max stepped into his shoes of eventually turning into a team captain and key piece to that offense, even if production-wise he had 0 carries and just 12 receptions in his career, but built more like an old-school fullback with that compact 6'2", 250+ pound frame, constantly led the way for guys like Blake Corum and company, who put up big numbers, showing no hesitation about accelerating into linebackers and securing targets in space of motion. So clearly Kevin O'Connell wanted this type of player and have the option to go to those 21 personnel groupings again, with CJ Ham slated to end this 8-33 season and not being on the contract anymore. A few picks later, Charles Fleming from Steve F. Austin is a long fluid boundary corner at 6'1", 190 pounds, played a lot of soft press technique with calm feet and great acceleration, but could really bully receivers at that level of competition, and he can pair those 32-inch arms with a 42-inch vertical and win big-time aerial battles. There's a bit of a hitch up trying to plant and drive in off coverage due to that leggy build. His instincts and pattern matchability are still a work in progress, and that high center of gravity can also hurt him dealing with blockers. So he has a long ways to go, but I knew he'd go around here just based on the ceiling he presents, as someone who had some bright moments during Senior Bowl week, even if he of course also got schooled at times. The Vikings signed former Steeler James Pierre to a 2-year, $8.5 million deal this offseason, which is a really good number for him, to likely start alongside Isaiah Rodgers and Byron Murphy Jr. That's right around the timeline you'd expect Demings to be able to give you any positive snaps out on the field, but he has the upside to develop into a starter down the line. Then Damon Claiborne, the Wake Forest running back, they must have liked quite a bit, since he also moved up around here for him in exchange for a 6th rounder next year. This is a dynamic lateral mover who can kind of nonchalantly walk up, shuffle one way, and then jump cut across back gap as someone peeks around the blocker, ran a blazing 4.37 in the 40 at the combine, and it shows off in his ability to finish long runs in the paint. With proper coaching, his suddenness to whip his body around would allow him to be a problem on option routes. He worked down the field some, and has consistent technique catching the football. But he'll have a steep learning curve into a more traditional run scheme, where he doesn't shuffle his feet and wait for a lane to develop, like in that slow mesh for Wake. He's not someone who'll have tackles bounce off his legs or shake them off as he try to drag him down, and although he's shown improvement since his sophomore year, right now he overextends a lot in pass pro still. Claiborne may be your number 3 scat back, who could also take on some kick return duties, in place of Ty Chandler, who signed a small 1-year deal with New Orleans in free agency, with Aaron Jones regularly getting banged up, and Jordan Mason lacking the big playability. I can see a path for a player like this just inside the top 200 to at least get some tosses and space-oriented designated touches. And then Gavin Gerhardt from Cincinnati, unfortunately is the one guy here I didn't get my eyes on, 49-game starter and 3-time team captain with adequate size, but a center only from my understanding and a below-average athlete, so he's facing an uphill battle to beat up Michael Juergens for the one true backup center spot on the roster. After some speculation that he might move on, Minnesota extended defensive coordinator Brian Flores this offseason, and obviously with the addition of former Cardinals quarterback Kyler Murray, the expectation is to compete for the division this season, which this draft speaks to in terms of the positions they addressed, even though there are some developmental aspects to the names they actually brought in. That's especially the case on defense, with the 2 of the tackles who could very well be the designated starters as rookies already, and Thomas depending on if they still make moves at safety. The path isn't nearly as clear for Goldie, but I don't mind giving him some time based on what his role looked like in college. Meanwhile, the top 2 offensive additions are pretty defined as a swing lineman and a younger fullback, which we can argue how much of an impact they'll make this season, but the infrastructure is there for Kyler Murray to succeed this season and them to compete for a division title before they make any big-time decisions at quarterback next year, considering the JJ McCarthy experiment may already be over, as much as people in Minnesota love to buy into the young man. Part of that is also signing former 49er Juwan Jennings to a deal that could be worth up to $13 million a few days ago, which will complement what they already have very much as a hard-nosed blocker and chain mover, so that helps after not targeting pass catcher at all here. However, that brings us to a divisional recap. One of the lesser divisions as a whole when it comes to what I believe they will to accomplish over draft weekend, or at least that I have questions about. I put the Packers at the top of the list, but didn't feel great about it. I probably put them right around average league-wide, but with them I at least understand how they operate, and this was another class very much in line with that. I believe Brandon Cece has the potential to be a star corner. Overall, they threw a lot of resources at the defense yet again, with a new play caller. And last year, if Micah Parsons stays healthy, they're probably the biggest threat to the Seahawks and Rams in the NFC. So they didn't need to make a bunch of moves necessarily. The Bears are second for me. Absolutely loved seeing Dylan Phenomen. Some have thought to them at pick 25. I believe they right away found the long-term replacement at center in a great trade with Logan Jones, even though he might have been a little bit early. I understood the urgency of getting Sam Roush early in the third, with the day 2 run on those inline tight ends, and I don't mind the trio of defenders they got on day 3, but the Savion Thomas pick in the late third rounds was just wild to me, and I can't get behind, along with not even throwing a dart at a quality edge class. Lions are third, just a little early in the first 3 guys for me, a couple of trade-ups where they got kinda nervous about getting sniped. When there were actually better players available, for me and many others, who would have very much fit that strong side the end role. Absolutely love Keith Abney as a steal in round 5, who I believe can be a legit impact star in this league if he gets a chance, but I can't let that push everything else up when I don't fully agree with the process and some of the players they favored over others. And Vikings are last, even if there was nothing egregious necessarily. They're just taking a big gamble of Caleb Banks at pick 18, which they probably should have found a way to move back from if possible, or simply picked Dylan Phenomen, who everyone seemed to mock to them, and could have addressed that hole at safety. And beyond that, a mixture of role players on offense and a bunch of defenders whose best football won't be played in 2026. Just sort of mixed signals, even though I will give them credit for adding extra selections elsewhere. But that's gonna do it for the end of this first edition of the 2026 Divisional Draft and Roster Review Series. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please let me know by hitting the thumbs up button and maybe also the bell if you want to follow along with this piece of off-season content and all my other work. You can also check out my overall draft recap with biggest winners, losers, steals and reaches, and the article I released last week on some undrafted free agents that could make an early impact in the NFL, all over at HelloSWithFootballtalk.com, which the link for that is down below. I'll be back in a couple of days with the AFC North and would love to have you back for it. So until then, see you later. Peace!